Today we will be talking about heart physiology. Heart physiology includes electrical events. One of them is the intrinsic conduction system, which basically sets the basic rhythm of the heart. So there are a few parts to this intrinsic conduction system. One of them, the first part, will be action potential initiated by the autorhythmic cells. Autorhythmic cells are pacemaker cells, which basically what sets off the contractions in the heart. Inside the cell membrane, it becomes less negative, making it reach its threshold potential level. A lot of calcium ion channels open in the heart muscles instead of the sodium ions, which happens in the skeletal muscles. So as lots of the calcium ions move into the cardiac cell, this starts an action potential that's spread throughout the heart. So due to the unstable resting potential membrane that causes all the ions to move in and out through the cell, some of the cells, of the heart cells, are always depolarizing, and when they hit the threshold, they contract. After that, the repolarization by potassium channels open to let the potassium out of the cell on skeletal muscle cells. Of the intrinsic conduction system is the excitation sequence. And in the excitation sequence, you can see that the different parts that go along with it. So the main parts of this is going to be the sinoatrial nodes, which is the SA node, which is going to be located up here in the right atrium. The atrioventricular node, which is the AV node, which is located a little bit right under it. The bundle of His, which is the atrioventricular bundle, which is going to be running right through the middle. And then we have the right and left bundle branches, which is what the AV bundle breaks apart into. And then we have the Purkinje fibers, which run from the apex of the heart branch and go superiorly into the walls of the ventricles. So, as the first part, as the sinoatrial nodes, which is the SA node, waves of depolarization run into the internodal pathway. The heart beats at about 100 beats per minute. Normal, on average, is 75 beats per minute. This slows down the heartbeat, the vagus nerve, which is part of the parasympathetic nervous system, away from the heart and neck, and slows down the SA node. The SA node fires, causes sweeps across the atria, causing it to contract. The atrioventricular node, which is the next node that, as we are going down this way, it's going to be this one right over here. The SA node sends a message to the AV node. Sinus rhythm, which is SA node back in control. The AV node catches impulses and holds onto it. It delays it for a little bit. It holds it to let the atria finish contracting, then passes the impulse on. AV node also is autorhythmic, which beats 50 beats per minute, which is slower than the SA node. The next is the bundle of His, so as we keep going down, which is also called the bundle branches or the atrioventricular bundle. It is autorhythmic, and these bundle beats 30 beats per minute. After that, we're going to hit the right and left bundle branches, which is what these break off into. And then the Purkinje fibers are the fibers that run from the apex of the heart and branch and go superiorly into the walls of the ventricles. Branch ends in the Purkinje fibers. They tell the muscles of the ventricle to contract, so both ventricles contract. Also runs up the papillary muscle, which pulls at the chordae tendineae, which is the one that helps open the valves. Extrinsic innervation of the heart. This is modifying the basic rhythm. So it's controlled by multiple things. One system of control is the autonomic nervous system, which is broken up into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system speeds up the heart rate, so the heart beats faster and harder. The parasympathetic system is the opposite, and it slows down the heart rate and relaxes it. The medulla oblongata is another thing that affects the heart rate. The cardio-exhalatory center speeds up the heart rate, exactly as how it says in the name, and the cardio-inhibitory center slows down the heart rate, and this is controlled by the vagus inhibition nerve, which is the 10th nerve. Part that we're going to talk about is going to be electrocardiography, which stands for ECG, or also known as EKG more commonly. You've probably seen this before and never knew what it made sense of, but that is showing different waves, 3 reflection waves that we're going to talk about right now. before we move on and make sense of what they are. So the P wave, which is this one right over here, the P wave is the atrial depolarization. So the atrium is contracting. The QRS complex, which is this right over here, is the ventricles contracting. And the T wave, which is this at the end, is the ventricular repolarization. So it's the relaxation of the ventricles. And this entire wave happens over and over. So these are the types of rhythm defects that can happen in your heart. We're going to go through it, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about what happens in these situations. So an arrhythmia is when the electrical impulses in the heart does not work properly. Fibrillation is the miscommunication between cells and the atria and ventricles. So your heart cells are not beating together. Everything is out of loop. And this can cause VFib, which is what it is commonly called. Junctional rhythm is when the sinoatrial node fails. So that's the pacemaker. So the pace is set by the AV node, and from that the AV node is a lot slower than the SA node, so your body is not pumping blood as fast as it can to fuel your whole body. Ectopic focus is some place other than your SA node, which is your sinoatrial node, is controlling your heartbeat. So for example, it could be the use of caffeine, and it picks up an extra heartbeat when you drink too much. That's when you start getting jittery. Heart block is when the AV node is damaged and bundle branches are causing ventricles to contract, and your heart is contracting at 30 beats per minute. Cardiac cycle. There are some terms that we should know before we get started. A few terms that we need to know. First, the cardiac cycle is a complete heartbeat. Next, systole is when it's contracting. So I think of squeeze and systole, two S's. And then diastole is relaxation that take place in the cardiac cycle. So there's a lot going on, and after we have went through all of the terms, we should be able to grasp this idea a lot better. So I added pictures to this video so you can see what we're talking about. So the first event we're going to start off with is the mid to late diastole. So like I said, diastole is relaxing. So as it's relaxing, the blood is filling into the atria and into the ventricles. The semilunar valves are closed, and the AV valves start closing at the end. So the heart has been relaxed for a while, the ventricles are filling up. This is the beginning of phase 1. As the SA node fires, that's the P wave on the EKG. So that's going to be this part right over here. The atrial systole happens next, which is when the atria contracts and squeezes the rest of the blood into the ventricles. When the QRS complex starts, that's when the ventricles depolarize. Ventricular diastole, which is when the ventricles contract. Atria is now relaxed and the AV valves are closed. Ventricular ejection phase happens here. Early diastole is the isovolumetric relaxation. This is when the ventricles are relaxed, the semilunar valves are closed on the pulmonary trunk, the atria is refilling with blood and pushes AV valves open, and the ventricles refill. Isovolumetric means the volume of the heart has not changed yet. Alright, so going through that was a lot of information. So I'm just going to read off what it says, what I wrote here on the screen. So first, we start off with the SA node, and an electrical impulse travels from the SA node to the walls of the atria, causing them to contract. The impulse then reaches the atrioventricular node, which delays it by about 0.1 seconds. So this is where we are right now. The bundle branches carries the signals from the atrioventricular node to the apex, and then the signal spreads throughout the ventricle walls, causing them to contract, which is right over here. So this is where the purple is where it is contracting. Great. Here's another visual that I found that I thought was very helpful. So the passive filling and the atrial contraction happens in phase 1, which is ventricular diastole, which is when the blood is moving into the atrium and the ventricles. And then ventricular systole is a squeezing. So this is when the AV valves close and the semilunar valves open, allowing it to eject blood through the body. And then this is another visual which I thought was very helpful. This is an example of an EKG, and it tells you from the waves, the different waves that we have, what happens when. So the atrial diastole is when is right over here, and then systole is when it starts to squeeze. So that's the end of the P wave, and then the beginning of the QRS. And then atrial diastole is when it is filling up again. And then at the same time, you can also compare it to what's happening in the ventricles as well. So the ventricular diastole is when it is relaxed. This is when the ventricles squeeze, and then this is when it relaxes again. And this is the entire cardiac cycle. Heart sounds. So heart sounds are the lub-dub that you hear when you are listening on a stethoscope or something like that. Lub is the AV valves closing, and then the dub is the semilunar valves closing. This is a few different terms that we have to know so that we can make sense of the amounts of volume and blood and how much it contains before the contraction, after the contraction. So we're going to start off from this side, and we're going to move over to this side. So the first term we're going to learn is EDV, which stands for end diastolic volume, and this is the amount of blood the ventricles contain after the atria contracts. So this is the most amount of blood that the ventricles are going to contain inside of that space. The ESV, which is the next term that we're learning, is the end systolic volume. It's the amount of blood the ventricles contain after it contracts. And this is the least amount of blood they're ever going to contain, just because this is after contraction, so all the blood has just been most of the blood, but has just been pumped out of the ventricles. Stroke volume is the next term we're going to learn, and the stroke volume is the amount of blood pumped by one ventricle in one heart. Cardiac output, is the volume, which is the amount of blood pumped in a ventricle in 1 minute. And then the last one is cardiac reserve, which is a difference between resting and maximum cardiac output. About the regulation of stroke volume. Preload is how much blood you have in ventricles before it contracts. And this is, preload also tells you how much you can stretch the muscle. Starling's law says that the more blood you have in the ventricles, the stronger the contraction is. Therefore, the stroke volume goes up. The more preload you have, the more volume there is, because there's a lot more space, and since it's stretchy, you can put more blood in there, so more volume. You can increase preload by, if you have a slower heartbeat, there's more time to fill. Or during exercise, the return of blood to the heart has increased because of your muscle is squeezing all the blood out of your veins. Contractility is how much the squeeze is, and factors affecting how hard your heart beats would be epinephrine, is an example, and it will make your heart beat faster. And then the afterload is how much pressure the ventricle has to push against. Regulation of heart rate includes the autonomic nervous system regulation, which would be the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system has epinephrine and norepinephrine, which increases the heart rate. And then the parasympathetic nervous system releases acetylcholine to lower the heart rate. And then vagal tone is the term for the vagus nerve, which is slowing down the heart rate, which is what the parasympathetic nervous system is in charge of. Baroreceptors detect pressure like the backup of blood. Chemical regulation includes hormones. So like we mentioned earlier, epinephrine increases the heart rate in the atria. Contractility speeds up the heart rate. Therefore, the heart beats faster. So this is what epinephrine does to the atria. And then diroxine increases the heart rate. Ions are other chemicals that affect the heart. It includes calcium ions, sodium ions, and potassium ions. So an increase in calcium ions makes the heart irritable. The decrease of them slows down the heart rate, because this is due to the memory potential and the threshold that we were talking about earlier that makes the heart contract. Increase in sodium stops the heartbeat, and then the increase in potassium also stops the heartbeat.